So one of the relevant concerns here in terms of the impact of GPT on society is the nature of truth. That's relevant to Wolfram Alpha, because computation through symbolic reasoning that's embodied in Wolfram Alpha as the interface, there's a kind of sense that what Wolfram Alpha tells me is true.
Mm-hmm. So we hope.
Yeah, I mean, you could probably analyze that. You could show, you can't prove that it's always going to be true, computational reducibility, but it's going to be more true than not.
It's look, the fact is, it will be the correct consequence of the rules you've specified. And insofar as it talks about the real world, that is our job in sort of curating and collecting data to make sure that that data is, quotes, as true as possible. Now, what does that mean? Well, it's always an interesting question. I mean, for us, our operational definition of truth is, somebody says, who's the best actress?
Mm-hmm.
Who knows? Mm-hmm. But somebody won the Oscar, and that's a definite fact.
Yeah.
And so, that's the kind of thing that we can make computational as a piece of truth. Yeah. If you ask, these things which, a sensor measured this thing, it did it this way. A machine learning system, this particular machine learning system recognized this thing. That's a sort of a definite, a fact, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And that's, there is a good network of those things in the world. It's certainly the case that, particularly when you say, is so-and-so a good person? Yeah. That's a hopelessly, we might have a computational language definition of good. I don't think it'd be very interesting because that's a very messy kind of concept, not really amenable to I think as far as we will get with those kinds of things is I want X. There's a kind of meaningful calculus of I want X. And that has various consequences. I mean, I'm not sure. I haven't thought this through properly, but I think, a concept like, is so-and-so a good person? Is that true or not? That's a mess.
That's a mess that's amenable to computation. I think it's a mess when humans try to define what's good, like through legislation. But when humans try to define what's good through literature, through history books, through poetry, it starts being.
Well, I don't know. I mean, that particular thing, it's kind of like, we're going into kind of the ethics of what counts as good, so to speak, and what do we think is right, and so on. And I think that's a thing which, one feature is we don't all agree about that. There's no theorems about kind of there's no theoretical framework that says this is the way that ethics has to be.
Well, first of all, there's stuff we kind of agree on, and there's some empirical backing for what works and what doesn't, from just even the morals and ethics within religious texts. So we seem to mostly agree that murder is bad. There's certain universals that seem to emerge.
I wonder whether murder of an AI is bad.
Well, I tend to think yes, but and I think we're going to have to contend with that question. Oh, and I wonder what AI would say.
Yeah. Well, I think, one of the things with AIs is it's one thing to wipe out that AI that is only, it has no owner. You can easily imagine an AI kind of hanging out on the internet without having any particular owner or anything like that. And then you say, well, what harm does it? It's okay to get rid of that AI. Mm-hmm. Of course, if the AI has 10,000 friends who are humans, and all those 10,000 humans will be incredibly upset that this AI just got exterminated, mm-hmm. It becomes a slightly different, more entangled story. But yeah, no, I think that this question about what do humans agree about, it's there are certain things that human laws have tended to consistently agree about. There have been times in history when people have sort of gone away from certain kinds of laws, even ones that we would now say, how could you possibly have not done it that way? That just doesn't seem right at all. But I think, this question of what, I don't think one can say beyond saying, if you have a set of rules that will cause the species to go extinct, mm-hmm. That's probably you could say that's probably not a winning set of laws, because even to have a thing on which you can operate laws requires that the species not be extinct.
But between sort of what's the distance between Chicago and New York that Wolfram Alpha can answer, and the question of if this person is good or not, there seems to be a lot of gray area. And that starts becoming really interesting. I think you're, since the creation of Wolfram Alpha, have been a kind of arbiter of truth at a large scale.
Mm-hmm.
So this system generates more truth than...
Try to make sure that the things are true. I mean, look, as a practical matter, when people write computational contracts, and it's kind of like, if this happens in the world, then do this.
Yes.
And this hasn't developed as quickly as it might have done. This has been a sort of a blockchain story in part and so on, although blockchain is not really necessary for the idea of computational contracts. But you can imagine that eventually sort of a large part of what's in the world are these giant chains and networks of computational contracts. Mm-hmm. And then something happens in the world, and this whole giant domino effect of contracts firing autonomously that cause other things to happen. And, for us, we've been the main sort of source, the oracle of quotes, facts or truth or something for things like blockchain, computational contracts and such like. And there's a question of, what, I consider that responsibility to actually get the stuff right. And one of the things that is tricky sometimes is, when is it true? When is it a fact? When is it not a fact?
Yes.
I think the best we can do is to say, we have a procedure, we follow the procedure, we might get it wrong, but at least we won't be corrupt about getting it wrong, so to speak.
So that's beautifully put. And have a transparency about the procedure. The problem starts to emerge when the things that you convert into computational language start to expand. For example, into the realm of politics. Mm-hmm. So this is where it's almost like this nice dance of Wolfram Alpha and ChatGPT. ChatGPT, like you said, is shallow and broad. Mm-hmm. So it's going to give you an opinion on everything.
But it writes fiction as well as fact, which is exactly how it's built. I mean, that's exactly, it is making language, and it is making both, even in code, it writes fiction. I mean, it's kind of fun to see sometimes, it'll write fictional Wolfram language code.
Yeah.
That
kind of looks right.
Yeah, it looks right, but it's actually not pragmatically correct.
Yeah.
But yes, it has a view of kind of roughly how the world works at the same level as books of fiction talk about roughly how the world works. They just don't happen to be the way the world actually worked or whatever. But yes, that's no, I agree. That's sort of a we are attempting with our whole Wolfram language, computational language thing to represent at least. Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be how the actual world works, because we can invent a set of rules that aren't the way the actual world works and run those rules. But then we're saying we're going to accurately represent the results of running those rules, which might or might not be the actual rules of the world. But we also are trying to capture features of the world as accurately as possible to represent what happens in the world. Now, again, as we've discussed, the atoms in the world arranged, you say, I don't know, was there a tank that showed up, that drove somewhere? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, what is a tank? It's an arrangement of atoms that we abstractly describe as a tank. Mm-hmm. And you could say, well, there's some arrangement of atoms that is a different arrangement of atoms, but it's not, we didn't decide. It's like this observer theory question of, what arrangement of atoms counts as a tank versus not a tank.
So there's even things that we consider strong facts. You could start to kind of disassemble them and show that they're
Absolutely.
not.
Right. I mean, so the question of whether, I don't know, was this gust of wind strong enough to blow over this particular thing? Yeah. Well, a gust of wind is a complicated concept. It's full of little pieces of fluid dynamics and little vortices here and there. And you have to define, was it, what the aspect of the gust of wind that you care about might be, it put this amount of pressure on this, blade of some wind turbine or something. That's the, but if you have something which is the fact of the gust of wind was this strong or whatever, that, that is, you have to have some definition of that. You have to have some measuring device that says, according to my measuring device that was constructed this way, the gust of wind was this.
So what can you say about the nature of truth that's useful for us to understand ChatGPT? Because you've been contending with this idea of what is fact and not. And it seems like ChatGPT is used a lot now. I've seen it used by journalists to write articles. And so you have people that are working with large language models trying to desperately figure out how do we essentially censor them through different mechanisms, either manually or through reinforcement learning with human feedback, try to align them to not say fiction, just to say nonfiction as much as possible.
Right. Well, this is the importance of computational language as an intermediate. It's kind of like you've got the large language model. It's able to surface something which is a formal, precise thing that you can then look at, and you can run tests on it, and you can do all kinds of things. It's always going to work the same way, and it's precisely defined what it does. And then the large language model is the interface. I mean, the way I view these large language models, one of their important, there are many use cases, and, it's a remarkable thing. Could talk about some of these, literally, every day we're coming up with a couple of new use cases, some of which are very, very, very surprising. And things where, but the best use cases are ones where it's, even if it gets it roughly right, it's still a huge win. Like a use case we had from a week or two ago is read our bug reports. We've got hundreds of thousands of bug reports that have accumulated over decades. And it's like, can we have it just read the bug report, figure out where is the bug likely to be? And, home in on that piece of code. Maybe it'll even suggest some sort of way to fix the code. It might get that. It might be nonsense what it says about how to fix the code, but it's incredibly useful that it was able to,
so awesome. It's so awesome because even the nonsense will somehow be instructive. I don't quite understand that yet. There's so many programming related things, like for example, translating from one programming language to another is really interesting. It's extremely effective, but then the failures reveal the path forward also.
Yeah, but I think the big thing, in that kind of discussion, the unique thing about our computational language is it was intended to be read by humans.
Yes,
and so
that's really important,
right? And so it has this thing where you can, but thinking about sort of ChatGPT and its use and so on. One of the big things about it, I think, is it's a linguistic user interface. That is, so a typical use case might be, and take the journalist case, for example. It's like, let's say I have 5 facts that I'm trying to turn into an article, or I'm trying to write a report where I have basically 5 facts that I'm trying to include in this report. But then I feed those 5 facts to ChatGPT, it puffs them out into this big report. And then that's a good interface for another. If I just had in my terms those 5 bullet points, and I gave them to some other person, the person would say, I don't know what you're talking about, because these are, this is your version of this sort of quick notes about these 5 bullet points. But if you puff it out into this thing which is kind of connects to the collective understanding of language, then somebody else can look at it and say, oh, okay, I understand what you're talking about. Now, you can also have a situation where that thing that was puffed out is fed to another large language model. It's kind of like, you're applying for the permit to, I don't know, grow fish in some place or something like this. And and you have these facts that you're putting in, I'm going to have I'm going to have this kind of water, and I don't know what it is. You just got a few bullet points. It puffs it out into this big application. You fill it out. Then at the other end, the Fisheries Bureau has another large language model that just crushes it down, because the Fisheries Bureau cares about these 3 points, and it knows what it cares about. And so it's really the natural language produced by the large language model is sort of a transport layer that, is really LLM communicates with LLM. I mean, it's kind of like I write a piece of email using my LLM and, puff it out from the things I want to say. Your LLM turns it into, and the conclusion is X. Now, the issue is, that the thing is going to make this thing that is sort of semantically plausible. Mm-hmm. And it might not actually be what it might not be kind of relate to the world in the way that you think it should relate to the world. Now, I've seen this, I've been doing, I'll give you a couple of examples. I was doing this thing when we announced this plugin for ChatGPT. I had this lovely example of a math word problem, some complicated thing, and it did a spectacular job of taking apart this elaborate thing about, this person has twice as many chickens as this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it turned it into a bunch of equations. Mm-hmm. It fed them to Wolfram Language. We solved the equations. Everybody did great. Mm-hmm. We gave back the results. And I thought, okay, I'm going to put this in this blog post I'm writing. Okay, I thought I better just check. And turns out it got everything, all the hard stuff it got right. At the very end, last 2 lines, it just completely goofed it up and gave the wrong answer. And I would not have noticed this. Mm-hmm. The same thing happened to me 2 days ago. Okay, so I thought, I made this with this ChatGPT plugin kit. I made a thing that would emit a sound, would play a tune on my local computer, right? So ChatGPT would produce, a series of notes, and it would play this tune on my computer. Very cool. Okay, so I thought I'm going to ask it, play the tune that Hal sang when Hal was being disconnected in 2001. Okay, so it there it is.
Daisy. Was it Daisy?
Yes.
Daisy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So okay. So I think, and so it produces a bunch of notes. And I'm like, this is spectacular. This is amazing. And then I thought, I was just going to put it in. And then I thought, I better actually play this. And so I did. And it was Mary Had a Little Lamb.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. But it was Mary Had a Little Lamb.
Yeah. Yes.
Wow. So it was correct, but wrong.
Yes.
It was, you could easily be mistaken.
Yes, right. And in fact, I kind of I had this quote from Hal to explain, it's as the Hal, states in the movie, it's the Hal 9000 is, the thing was just a rhetorical device because I'm realizing, oh my gosh, this ChatGPT, could have easily fooled me. I mean, it did this amazing thing of knowing this thing about the movie and being able to turn that into the notes of the song, except it's the wrong song.
Yeah.
And, Hal, in the movie, Hal says, I think it's something like, no 9000 series computer has ever been found to make an error. Mm-hmm. We are, for all practical purposes, perfect and incapable of error. And I thought that was kind of a charming sort of quote from Hal to make in connection with what ChatGPT had done in that case.
The interesting things about the LLMs, like you said, that they are very willing to admit their error.
Well, yes. I mean, that's a question of the RLH, the reinforcement learning human feedback thing.
Oh, right.
That's
that's a nice
an
feature.
LLM. The really remarkable thing about ChatGPT is, I had been following what was happening with large language models, and I'd played with them a whole bunch, and they were kind of like, it's kind of like what you would expect based on sort of statistical continuation of language. It's interesting, but it's not breakout exciting. Mm-hmm. And then I think the kind of reinforcement, the human feedback reinforcement learning, in making ChatGPT try and do the things that humans really wanted to do, that broke through, that kind of reached this threshold where the thing really is interesting to us humans. And by the way, it's interesting to see how, you change the temperature, something like that, the thing goes bonkers, and it no longer is interesting to humans. It's producing garbage. Yeah. And it's kind of right. It's somehow it managed to get this above this threshold where it really is well aligned to what we humans are interested in, and kind of that's and I think nobody saw that coming. I think certainly nobody I've talked to and nobody who was involved in that project seems to have known it was coming. It's just one of these things that is a sort of remarkable threshold. I mean, when we built Wolfram Alpha, for example, I didn't know it was going to work. We tried to build something that would have enough knowledge of the world, that it could answer a reasonable set of questions, that we could do good enough natural language understanding that typical things you type in would work. We didn't know where that threshold was. I mean, I was not sure that it was the right decade to try and build this, even the right, 50 years to try and build it. And I think it's the same type of thing with ChatGPT, that I don't think anybody could have predicted that, 2022 would be the year that this became possible.
I think, yeah, you tell a story about Marvin Minsky and showing it to him and saying that, like, no, this time it actually works.
Yes. And I mean, it's the same thing for me looking at these large language models. It's like when people were first saying the first few weeks of ChatGPT, it's like, oh yeah, I've seen these large language models, and then I actually try it, and oh my gosh, it actually works. And I think the thing I found, I remember one of the first things I tried was write a persuasive essay that a wolf is the bluest kind of animal. Okay? So it writes this thing, and it starts talking about these wolves that live on the Tibetan plateau, and they're named some Latin name and so on. And I'm like, really? And I'm starting to look it up on the web, and it's like, well, it's actually complete nonsense. But it's extremely plausible. I mean, it's plausible enough that I was going and looking it up on the web and wondering if there was a wolf that was blue. I mentioned this on some live streams I've done, and so people have been sending me these pictures
Blue wolves.
of blue wolves.
Maybe it was onto something.